This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
We do this weird thing, and maybe we're more inclined to do it in the Western world, so to speak, in the United States and Canada. You don't see it as much. And as a matter of fact, you know what? You don't even see it in South America, and they're kind of West. And so already I'm apologizing, and the show's only 30 seconds old. They definitely don't do it in Europe. What is it that I'm talking about? It's knocking down buildings. It's knocking down architectural assets well before their time, demolishing history, demolishing character in pursuit of the new idea, the shiny new facility. Just look at how we treat stadiums and arenas. Look at a lot of the talk around government investment in sport. Heck, we're talking about it a lot in Edmonton 10 years ago, in Calgary right now, these old, decrepit buildings that, by the way, are younger than most of us. Well, this conversation's happening in Alberta's capital city again as one of the architectural gems, and I'm talking across the country. This building was commissioned, constructed, opened, the ribbon cut as Canada celebrated 100 years as a nation in 1967, but Alberta's provincial government has decided that the original Royal Alberta Museum is due for demolition. A group of local professionals, including a legendary architect, are speaking out against this, proposing alternative solutions, and you're going to hear from her in this episode of Real Talk. But first, I want to let you know that this episode is happening with the presenting sponsorship of Business Career College, and they're putting out the call in particular to those of you financial advisors and senior finance professionals that are looking to learn more about digital assets and decentralized finance. It's no secret that cryptocurrency is going to change Canadians' investments and their perception of private wealth. As a matter of fact, 3/4 of the new generation of investors are interested in adding digital assets to their financial portfolios. So you're going to want to check out the CDAA, that's Certified Digital Asset Advisor designation, and you can learn more about it at businesscareercollege.com. It's going to help you build a stable foundation as a financial advisor to future-proof your own career, and you're going to do it with Business Career College, a leader in financial training since 1997. If you use the promo code Ryan20 when you sign up for that CDAA designation, they're going to knock 20% off your course. That's Ryan20, all one word, at businesscareercollege.com. Vivian Manasc is a name. If you want to talk about architecture in Canada, this is a name right up near the top of the list of those that have influenced the profession and excelled at it. She's a graduate in architecture from McGill. She earned her MBA at the University of Alberta, and she currently leads Reimagined, which is easily one of the most innovative Western Canadian architectural practices. Reimagining existing buildings has been a huge focus of Vivian's leadership in sustainable design, and we're grateful that she's agreed to join us this morning in our studio in the historic Mercer Warehouse. It's so nice to see you, Vivian. Welcome to the show.
Great to see you, Ryan. It's great to be here.
What is it that makes you tick when you were a young girl, when you're born in Romania, right? And you grow up, your family immigrates originally, you grow up in Montreal. You have been for your entire life surrounded by magnificent architecture, haven't you?
Absolutely. And architecture makes a difference. It creates the memories, right? Creates the memories of our cities. When we travel, we always remember the buildings that we've been to, right? We remember the museums, we remember the Eiffel Tower, we remember those landmarks and those icons. And especially cultural facilities like museums always create really important memory for our community. So that's very much a part of what I grew up with.
This conversation, I think we're going to have kind of two themes of this conversation. There will be people that live in Alberta, that live in our home province, that are familiar with this building. It was called the Ram for a lot of years, and they're going to have a specific interest in protecting or preserving this building. And then I think there's a bigger conversation to be had about how we treat our architectural crown jewels, so to speak, or some of these buildings that have been, I would imagine, designed to stick around for a couple of hundred years.
Absolutely. I mean, buildings, fine cultural facilities, museums, cultural spaces have always been designed to last a long time. And our former RAM is absolutely no exception, but it's not the only building of its type that was designed to last a long time. People took pride in public facilities. Even, public infrastructure was a point of pride. You see even, power stations and water treatment plants and all of those kinds of buildings that were designed to last 100 years. But certainly our museums and our cultural icons and our government facilities, those are buildings that were crafted beautifully and made to last for a very long time.
There are some buildings that nobody feels bad about tearing down. If you took the Stanley Cups and the sentiment away from Rexall Place or Northlands Coliseum or Skyreach Center, whatever you want to call it, off Wayne Gretzky Drive in Edmonton, nobody's really going to lament knocking that thing down because it's become a bit of an eyesore. And I say it respectfully. Obviously, It housed a lot of memories there. But the RAM, the former RAM, is a building, in my mind, aesthetically, it still holds up. What's your assessment of it, architecturally, aesthetically, and otherwise?
Well, I think architecturally it is a strong building. It's definitely a period building. We don't have a lot of built remnants of the 1960s, and it was such an incredibly optimistic time, right, here in Alberta and across the country. I mean, I did grow up in Montreal, and, Expo 67 was a big deal.
Right.
The whole sort of heightened awareness of Canada on the world stage and how Canada was really taking the lead in being a place of, peace and future focus. And all of the 67 projects, the Expo projects or the national centennial projects across the country were places of pride. But, I want to go back to what you were saying about, the rather ugly duckling buildings, because even the ugly duckling buildings can be reimagined, and they can be reimagined and made really more beautiful and sustainable. And so it is the beautiful buildings that we want to preserve, but actually many significant large buildings can be reimagined effectively and economically and beautifully, and you can transform existing buildings into things you didn't imagine that they could become.
I probably should have picked a different example than the house that Gretzky built, right? For my example on something that we tear down and don't feel too bad about.
Well, it's less about necessarily Gretzky and more about the fact that it's a sound building, right? It's like it's got fabric of the building, and yes, it has memories, but it's got substance. It's got concrete and steel and materials that you can reuse, right?
Well, let's talk about this. Can we just let's call it the RAM? So we'll let our podcast audience know when we talk about the RAM. I'm not talking about the new one, the shiny, sexy new one that's right next to Edmonton's Hockey Arena downtown, and it's a really beautiful facility, and that's great, hundreds of millions of dollars, obviously. But when I'm talking about the RAM in this conversation, I'm talking about the original building that was opened in 1967, a 56-year-old facility, and I'll credit. Paula Simons was putting this on everybody's radar, and Ramin Ostad at Post Media has been writing about it. This is a facility made with Manitoba Tyndall stone.
That's right.
She wants it designated as a historic site. What's so special about the stone and its construction?
Well, the stone is actually really beautiful, and it is one of the few quarryable stones in Western Canada. We don't have a lot of granite like we have in Eastern Canada. So in Western Canada, masonry buildings are actually very special. Even brick buildings are more rare than they are in other parts of the country. But Tyndall stone is especially beautiful, partly because it actually has fossils in it. And so it's actually part of a historic or prehistoric, I guess, lake bed. And it's quarried, and it has this beautiful variegation, and you can actually see the fossils in the stone,
like in the walls.
In the walls,
and there are carvings into the walls as well in the building. I mean, it's really stunning.
It really is stunning. Those carvings are spectacular, and they are incredibly important because they were done by Indigenous artists at a time when it was an early time of acknowledging the Indigenous presence in our country. Right, so I think there's a lot of really important cultural history, and the materials of the building are really finely crafted as well. So not just great materials, but beautifully put together materials.
Since the new museum opened in downtown Edmonton, and I'm not sure on the exact timeline, but essentially the old RAM has sat vacant.
Yeah.
Does somebody like you with a lot of experience in sustainable design or a lot of experience in trying to reimagine old buildings, do you get a little nervous when a building like that sits and sits and sits?
Absolutely. And yet many buildings do sit for a long time, and then a new use is found for them, right? And so it's not super uncommon to see that happen, where buildings sit for a while until somebody comes along and says, we have a great idea, here's what to do with this building. Because the buildings are large, they are hard to repurpose, a little bit hard to repurpose. But, there's so many things you could do with that former RAM. And, you might or might not know about this, but the building's got 2 giant levels of basement. So you could do everything from putting data centers in there to putting, community facilities, cultural facilities. You could put a spa in there. I mean, there are many things that one could put into that facility wherever, whatever, if you just use some imagination.
We've got the smartest talk audience in the country, and so they always give us solid ideas and hold us accountable as well in our live chat. And so we've got a lot of ideas already in here on what people would do. But there's one good point that's being made here that people are wondering about the prohibitive cost of operating a facility like this. It's obviously been operating with public money in past. I don't know if it was efficiently run or not. That's not really the point. But the point is what it might cost now to overhaul this thing, to bring people in. Can you take us through what that might look like, and maybe if you've seen that work in past?
Oh, for sure. It takes a bit of effort for sure, and some money and some investment to renovate the building to whatever the new use is. And that would include things like, removing the asbestos and cleaning up the building and probably putting in new mechanical systems and new electrical systems. And then depending on the use, so for example, if you were going to put data centers in the basement, well, you would put in really high-end cooling systems and operational systems, but you'd build that into the cost of operating the data center, right? And so you'd have a revenue business model that would work. And same thing with, a cultural facility. If you had, the city of Edmonton has been looking for a museum for a long time. I mean, if the city ran a museum there, they could do something where they charged a certain amount of
Sure.
admission and so on. Or, First Nations groups have been talking about a cultural center or an Indigenous center in the city.
I love that idea.
Yeah, and that's been actually talked about for the last at least 5 years by quite a few of the First Nations groups that we're familiar with here in the city. And they've talked about, could that building be repurposed as an Indigenous cultural center?
It sounds perfect, doesn't it? I mean, even the location of it, for people that aren't aware, it's fairly close to Edmonton's River Valley.
Yeah.
There are some other facilities on site. There's Government House, which the UCP government says it intends to keep. Government House, for people, the political audience, you may remember that. That's where Alison Redford walked down the steps after she resigned. That's kind of, in my mind, the most famous light cast on that building in the last 20 years. Some other facilities there, an old historic carriage house that I understand they intend to keep. But this is the main building they're talking about knocking down. I am referencing Post Media reporting on this. Alberta Infrastructure says it spends about $700,000 annually to maintain the building while it sits unused.
Yeah.
They say that there are complications like asbestos removal. I want to ask you about that. They say that the price of renovating or repurposing the RAM would be about $150 million, which, to be honest, sounds low compared to other investments, including $75 million in deferred maintenance. Demolishing it is estimated to cost between $22 and $48 million.
Yeah, well, the demolition would include the cost of the asbestos abatement anyways. So once you're removing the asbestos, then you've got a clean building, and then you might as well repurpose it, because if the difference is only about $75 million, well, you can't build a data center for $75 million. You can't build a cultural center for $75 million in today's dollars.
Not a chance. It'd be $400 million, wouldn't it? The rink in town was built cheap, like not cheap quality, but it was built inexpensive for like $630 million. Calgary's is going to be $1 billion for context, right?
Oh yeah, construction costs have escalated a great deal, especially post-COVID. We're seeing a huge spike in the cost of construction, and so reimagining existing buildings is even more economical than before. It's funny. It brings to mind a story from many years ago. We worked on the design of what's now called the East Edmonton Primary Care Center, and it's out on 82nd Street and 112th Avenue. And initially, Alberta, or I guess it was Capital Health of the day, but Alberta Health Services had acquired that site, and it had an old school on it. It had a former Cromdale school. And the initial intent was to demolish the old school and build a new health facility. And we took a look at it and asked our friends at Alberta Health, or Capital Health then, whether they'd consider letting us keep the existing building as a portion of the new build. And they basically said, well, it'll cost too much, right? Same argument. It'll cost too much to renovate it. And so we actually did the analysis and demonstrated to them that it actually wouldn't cost any more than building the same amount of square footage new. And in the end, they approved it, which was great. And so if you drive by, that part of town, you'll notice that the old Cromdale School is actually integrated into the East Edmonton Primary Care Center. And it turned out, because we were actually also in inflationary construction cost times back then, around 2008, just like we are today, it turned out that was actually the most economical part of the entire project. And we were able to successfully integrate the old Cromdale School, upgrade it, clean it up, give it new windows, new heating system, everything. And it now forms a part of the community. And it turned out really well because it fits the scale of the community, it maintains the history and the culture and the memories of the community, and provides all the contemporary health services that the health authority required.
You've injected new life into it.
Yeah.
If you're just tuning in, live streaming our audio on the Mixlr audio app presented by California Closets, we're talking to legendary architect Vivian Manasc. You okay with me invoking the word legendary? I know you're wincing every single time I say it, but I mean, if you've earned the right, I'm going to say it, Vivian. You wrote a column, and I wanted to read a specific part of it. Different governments, and this is a trend across the country and around the world perhaps, are criticized for their lack of consultation. And this government in Alberta certainly qualifies on a number of fronts. I can think of the bear hunt. We've been talking about that, dealing with problem bears. Talked about it just yesterday. If you missed our episode, encourage you to check it out. But it's kind of a recurring theme. And you write, unfortunately, the government of Alberta has embarked on a predetermined path. Instead of consulting the community as to the future of this important building, ignoring the pleas of members of the community for the protection of this site, as well as pleas by many nonprofits for the use of the building, the province chose to consult on only the nature of the green space that would result from its demolition. This is like asking people what kind of funeral you would prefer, rather than whether you might choose treatment for your illness.
Right.
Well said.
Well, thank you. I think that's exactly it. I think this government has really not consulted completely, because there are so many voices in the community. And I know of groups, specifically some of the First Nations groups that we work with, who have specifically met with ministers of government over the last 5 years and have asked for the use of that building. I know of private sector developers who have met with ministers of government and deputy ministers of government who've asked and proposed alternative uses for the building. And so I think the lack of consultation is really stunning when you see that there's so much interest in this particular facility and so many opportunities to reimagine it.
Let me put this in front of you. Darren in our chat, he says basically, I think if they had a serious buyer or a serious potential operator, it would already have been repurposed. He says keeping it around, hoping somebody eventually wants it, seems silly. It's prime land if the ram is gone. No, Darren's absolutely correct. It sure is prime land. It's about as prime of land as you could find. It's nestled right in there. For people that don't know Edmonton, with some of the most beautiful private properties in the city, some of the most magnificent homes in the city. It shares a fence with some of them. It's right on the river valley. It's right across the Grote Bridge. It's right near that high street shopping area just off Jasper. I mean, it is prime time.
It is, and yet, there's plenty of green space, and that's what government's proposing. They're not proposing to repurpose it for some other higher and better use.
Well, I wonder if maybe 10 years down the road, all of a sudden, there's a big high-rise going up in there.
Well, and if there were, it might as well be done now and integrate the former RAM into it. I don't think a high-rise is necessarily the right strategy, but I think there's lots of possibilities. And if whatever possibilities there are, they can and should integrate the existing building. There's wonderful examples from all over the world where historic buildings have been integrated into new towers. Even right here in our city, there are historic buildings that have been integrated into new towers. So you could do that if you needed to. But there's so many options. And I don't think that government has actually rigorously checked the market to see, are there good opportunities to put new uses into that facility.
What do you think's going on? I'll recognize you're an architect and not a political scientist. So answer the question however you choose to see fit. And I am asking you to speculate. But what do you think the deal is? Like, just when I first heard this story, it was only about a week ago I heard it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I went, what? I'm just kind of like, what? I understand knocking down old warehouses. Sometimes you got people make the argument for something's architectural or historical significance, and people can choose to be swayed by the argument or not. This one seems to me to be a no-brainer.
This really is a no-brainer. It really is a fine building. It's well made. It's beautiful. It's well loved in the community. I think it's just a failure of imagination. I think there are so many great opportunities to use this site and to repurpose this building and to make it come back to life. And I think that the government feels maybe it's more expedient. And, I recognize that governments are driven by election cycles and that, if they demolish it, it's faster and they can get that done before the next election. That would be unfortunate because it might take a little longer to fully do the consultation, to fully select the right partners, to completely repurpose it, to build in, something like maybe a data center in the basement and maybe a cultural center at the main floor and some other facilities. That will take more time. It will. And so I think that, not being a political scientist, I would say the expediency is perhaps what's going on.
Yeah, I'm assuming you've referenced a data center a few times. That's not my wheelhouse, and I don't know much about it, but I'm assuming you're referencing comments that have been made by Alberta's technology minister, Nate Glubish, right? He a couple of months ago said that he saw a huge opportunity, which I think is a good thing, for Alberta to be the data center capital of Canada, if not North America. Those were the minister's words. He says, I believe that data centers are a good fit for Alberta, and we can bring a lot of value to the table. Is that what you're referencing?
That is what I'm referencing, and I'm also referencing the fact that a number of years ago, we actually were working for the city of Calgary and designing an emergency operations center for them, and then the city asked us to add a data center to that facility. And so we created actually underground data center, quite a large, very sophisticated data center, one of the city's key ones, and that keeps the city of Calgary going during, difficult times. And having had the experience of designing a data center and seeing what goes into that kind of a facility, I can see what a great fit portions of the former RAM could be for that exact application. And I just know how costly those buildings are to build and to fit out. And so if we have space available, why not deploy it in that way? And that would take advantage of the fact that the building has way too much basement for pretty much any other use that you could think of. But there are other possible uses too. But that is definitely one that keeps coming to mind because it's maybe one that hasn't been in the conversation. And so I just wanted to put it on the table as a suggestion that might tweak some curiosity.
Might sort of like you plant an idea and water it a little bit. One of the world's great cities was on display for the past few weeks, obviously, as Paris hosted the Olympic Games, and these aerial shots, and you're just like, obviously, what a magnificent place. And I don't think it's fair to say that Canadians knock down buildings. I recognize that European culture and other cultures around the world, many Asian cultures, et cetera, have architectural histories that extend hundreds, if not thousands of years. We're much more of a new nation as Canada anyway. But if you go to Montreal or if you go to Quebec City, you'll see buildings that are hundreds of years old. You'd be hard pressed to find one anywhere in Western Canada, respectfully. Yeah. What is it about the way that we're wired? What is it about the way that we build or tear down or rebuild our cities? What is it with that?
Well, I think it's a really great question. To some extent, it's about advocacy. I remember when I was still in Montreal in the mid 70s. Phyllis Lambert, who you may or may not know, is the CEO of the Canadian Centre for Architecture, but she's also a really outstanding advocate for protecting existing buildings. She started advocating for not demolishing historic buildings in Montreal back in the 70s. And at that time, when I moved to Alberta, not long after, I was surprised that everything around was being demolished. And so there wasn't really a loud, outstanding voice in the way that Phyllis Lambert was advocating in Montreal. And I think, the fact that Phyllis Lambert was a prominent, wealthy person got the attention of the financial community, of the business community, in a way that maybe hasn't happened here. But here it's lovely to see, for example, Senator Paula Simons, who's been advocating for the repurposing of
She's
this
choked
building.
about this.
She's really, really choked about it. And Paula and I have spoken many times about this, and we're on the same page. Like, we're all really convinced that there are better solutions than tearing this building down. And I think that's to some extent what's happened in Alberta, is there hasn't been the loud and proud advocacy for historic buildings. Lots of examples, like the Tegler building, for example, was torn down, and then the Bank of Montreal building was built, and then sure enough, the Bank of Montreal building is gone, and there sits an empty site. For what reason, we don't know, but it just seems to be the way that things are done here. Our former City Hall is another example, right? Back in the 50s, we had a, loud and proud City Hall, and then in the 80s, we tore it down and built a new one, and hopefully this one will last a little longer. But, I think there's that tendency here to just build something new and be short-sighted. And I think the time has come for Alberta to grow up and be, take a longer view, or take that 7-generation view that some of our First Nations colleagues advocate for and inspire us with, to say, we can be better than that. We don't have to just tear things down and start again. We have enough pride in our history and in our culture that we could retain our existing buildings and do something amazing with them.
Yeah, I saw somebody write once that if you live anywhere in Alberta, or if you're living in Edmonton and you're under 25 years of age, you've probably never been in that building. And I wonder if maybe that has something to do with it as well. People's memories are kind of fleeting, and we talk about, look at how I was talking about Rexall Place and Wayne Gretzky. Like, we develop connections to places.
That's right.
And that's very powerful. But that's not to say that when places aren't reimagined and reopened, that a whole new generation couldn't establish their own connections.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you were talking about Paris and London, and I was actually in both Paris and London in the last couple of years. And for example, in London, the old the old Battersea Power Station sat vacant for probably 30 years while various people tried to repurpose it and think of things to do with it. And finally, it's just reopened, and it's spectacular. It's got commercial space, it's got residential space, it's a real asset to the community. The City of London's even built a new tube station to get folks in and out of there, and it's amazing. We talk about the need for housing. In other cities have a similar situation, and they've solved it by repurposing historic buildings. So we can do that too.
Yeah, the EPCOR power station in Edmonton's an interesting one, isn't it?
Absolutely.
There's a lot of there is huge cultural significance to Indigenous people that have used and observed, in many cases, spiritual traditions on that land. And obviously, I know there's a ton of consideration that's going into that.
Yeah.
Is that one that's been on your radar? You must be at the very least intrigued by it, but I would imagine even maybe a bit more than that.
Absolutely, very much more than that. I've been paying attention to that one for a long time. And that one, too, was at risk of being demolished a number of years ago. And I remember talking to some colleagues over at EPCOR, and they were not quite sure why we wanted to keep old power stations. And it's like, well, look around the world and see what can be done with buildings like that. It's remarkable what you can do. And, we could have... Yeah, that's another space where you could have an Indigenous cultural center, or you could have a museum of contemporary art, which we don't have in Edmonton. Or
I'm thinking anything like Granville Island in Vancouver, or the Forks in Winnipeg, or all of these areas where people gather right on the waterfront. And,
absolutely.
There's a ton of commerce that's done down there. There's a lot of opportunity for people, but you're also preserving, some of these buildings.
Exactly.
To me, the EPCOR power plant's an interesting one because it's like, for people that don't know, and then you hear it's protected, isn't it? Like you can't just knock it down.
Yeah, it is now protected.
And some people might look at it and kind of not see the magnificence in it.
Mm-hmm.
But then you talk to others, and it's obviously a very significant area. But what sort of blows my mind about it, just as a casual observer, just as a private citizen, is that it's just sitting there with nothing happening.
That's right.
Right? It's not being torn down, nor is it being reinvented. It's just sitting there. And I know they've thrown some big events there, and they've lit it up beautifully and brought in catering. And I think they're trying to, reiterate to people that there's a lot of potential there. But as of right now, it just sits.
Yeah, and I think these things do take time, and then eventually the right partnership arrives, and sometimes it's a question of some sort of, private sector investment in partnership with a public sector interest or commitment, and it often takes that right partnership to come to the table. And some sort of mix of new development and historic repurposing, I think, can be very successful.
So, people like you, when you attach your name to, it obviously catches our attention. Senator Simons, there's others, there's many other people that are talking about this, many of them influential Albertans. Do you have a call to action for our audience? Is this like an email your MLA type situation?
Absolutely. I think that would be awesome if everybody would email their MLA and say, hey, this isn't the time to demolish this building. Just take a deep breath. Look at the uses, look at the possible ways to reimagine this building. Take another year if you need to do the consultation, to do the engagement, to find the right business partners, put the call out to the marketplace, and just take a little bit more time. Don't be in a hurry. There's no rush. And the building will last a long time, even if it costs a little bit to maintain it in its current state. You could even start by removing the asbestos, because frankly that has to happen regardless. And so you could do some of those initial moves and keep working towards finding the right mix of ways to reimagine that site. And I'm sure that new use will come to light in the next very short time.
Vivian Manasc directs the team at Reimagined. You can check out what they do at reimagined.ca. She's an author as well, including the book Old Stories, New Ways, Architecture Informed by Indigenous Ways of Knowing. It's been a real pleasure having you here in the studio. This is your Real Talk debut, isn't it?
This is.
I know we spoke like many years ago, but this is your first time on this show, and it's really nice to have you here, Vivian.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for doing it.
Great. Thanks, Ryan.
You bet. Let us know what you think about what you just heard. I'd love to hear from people that are living in this region. I'd love to hear from people that are living in this neighborhood. What about people that used to visit that old Royal Alberta Museum with their parents or their grandparents that feel a connection to it? I love Vivian. What a storyteller, reminding us about those fossil properties, those incredible, iconic, just these little gems, right into the walls. There's art actually carved into the walls of this place. If you remember tracing your fingers over it, send us an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story as it develops, and of course, we'll keep you in the loop. These conversations are presented on Real Talk with the support of partners of ours like Friesen Brothers, who want to remind you can find details on their website of how they're supporting the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade. Friesen Brothers is matching donations up to $50,000, and all funds will be given directly to the Jasper Volunteer Fire Brigade. You simply request at the checkout $5 at the till. If you'd like to contribute, they'll add it to your tab. Together, we can make a real difference in our community. And a special shout out from us to our friends at the Friesen Brothers in Hinton, Alberta. I know that a lot of the firefighters have been filling their bellies out there, and a lot of the people that are working to rebuild that beautiful town of Jasper are going to be picking up their groceries at Friesen Brothers. You let them know that Real Talk sent you. Our team at Complete Care Restoration is also going to have certified and trained professionals working on that Jasper project. You know, they've got teams that are working on wildfire rebuilds, on flood fixes, remediation when it comes to smoke damage, water damage, mold, asbestos. All that talk about asbestos today. Complete Care Restoration has more than a quarter century of experience restoring properties like that and rebuilding peace of mind. Heaven forbid if disaster strikes in your community, Complete Care Restoration is ready to respond 24/7. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. And if your construction project is more focused on getting organized, on making the most of your number one investment, your home, make sure you take the time to check in with the team at California Closets. They build custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home like nobody else, guaranteed for life. They finish on time, they finish on budget, and they can help you determine the best plan of action for any room. For a lot of people, it's the boot room. For a lot of people, it might be the laundry room. Like, how much better would you feel? What would your peace of mind look like if every time you walked into your laundry room, it was well organized? Never mind the stunning guest bedroom options they've come up with, the walk-in closets. I mean, will take your breath away. You can see the examples, read the client stories, and learn more about that consultation by visiting them online at californiaclosets.ca.
The laundry room.
What's your laundry room looking like?
I call it the drop and go room. It's a fucking disaster.
Do you guys at least do when you drop your stuff in the laundry room, do you at least drop it into whites and darks?
Yeah.
Or his and hers? I mean, what are the rules of the laundry room?
Well, I'm not just talking about laundry. Like, usually I keep my laundry. We both have our own closets, so we have our own laundry hampers. But our laundry room is right when you walk in through the garage every day. So, you know, there's bags there. There's some of my DJ stuff.
Yeah.
Even on top of the washer, there's like, you know, I thinking right now, there's a box of like my partner's books that she, you know, I've read these too many times. I gotta get rid of.
So it's like a
just
storage
a clutter room
with
and
appliances.
As you're saying this, I'm like, we could really do with like some shelvings in there and stuff. Maybe
you know,
some
John,
cubby holes. And
the consultation is free.
I know.
I love it. From in our live chat, I think it was at Sylvia or Sharon. Someone, my apologies. The chat's humming today, but one of you said the Real Talk studio is in a refurbished building, isn't it? It sure is.
Yeah.
And one of the
Look
things
at
we've
this
been talking about is we need to get an exterior camera so we can show people the outside of the building as we're talking. But yeah, we're coming to you every single morning from a 110-year-old warehouse. It's the historic Mercer Warehouse. Yeah. There's a ton of history in this building,
this
including,
brick wall
by the
behind
way,
you is
this is real brick. This is not a green screen.
Refurb.
I don't know why. Yeah, this is not. And you see these massive. If you want to take that big wide shot, John. I mean, these big. What are these 12 by 12 beams? I think big fir beams. And when people walk into the studio in real life, we get people that get down. They crouch down and they actually touch their hands to the floor.
Yeah.
This is original hardwood. Now, if you're an audiophile, or if you're somebody that works in the recording arts, you're going, these guys built a studio with 20-foot ceilings and hardwood floors and brick. This is a nightmare. This is not the smartest place to build a studio, except for we want it to be in the heart of the action.
Yeah.
We want it to be downtown. We want it to be in Mercer. Mercer wanted us, quite frankly. And we've taken steps. And again, I'm not just turning this into a commercial, but the team at Complete Care Restoration, here's one example, did 5 layers of soundproofing in our roof, in our ceiling. That's one example. But we wanted to, you know, this is a house of hospitality. And, you know, part of what we do out of here is this show, but we also host our meetings in here. We host gatherings in here, election night viewing parties, you know, and that sort of a thing. And so we really wanted our space to reflect the spirit of what we're all about. But I'll tell you, like when you walk up to this building, and anytime, if you're visiting Edmonton or if you're from Edmonton, this is the area like right across the street from Rogers. We could throw a stone and hit Rogers Place, and you know, you basically walk up and there's just something about a building that has stood the test of time. This
Oh, it's
building,
beautiful.
110 years. I mean, this used to be a vegetable warehouse. There's all kinds of neat stories of what happened here. GWG Jeans, which was a great Western fashion brand in like the 70s and 80s. Wayne Gretzky used to model for GWG. They were manufactured in this building. I mean, it's just got a ton of history.
It feels incredible coming into work, just like all those stories you were talking about. They're printed on the side of the building.
Yeah.
And then across the street is the
Neon Sign Museum.
Neon Sign Museum, which you can actually look at the signs and see, oh my God, someone used to walk up under this and grab a paper for like a quarter in the morning. You know what I mean? Back in 1930 or 1950 or whatever it was. But yeah, it's I feel grateful every day walking into this building. And a lot of people are like, when you say refurbished, like it's not like anyone knocked down the walls in here. What they did is they put in some better electrical so it's safe.
Yeah.
Some internet. But if you walk through these halls,
They creak.
they're talking to you, man.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Lauren says that he's wanted to stumble or stagger. He says, I wanted to stagger to the Real Talk studio after Oilers games. Lauren, you wouldn't be the first.
And you won't get in.
And you may not get past our security, but no, we love you guys, especially in the live chat. We might have to do like a live chat little party here, maybe a live studio taping one of these days. But a lot of people are sort of remembering, these buildings and their connections to them. Leslie says that years ago, Leslie worked at an animation studio in one of the old Yale Town buildings. Says, I'm so glad that they've been restored. And by me mentioning GWG Jeans, I'm taking a bunch of you back right now as well. 80s Fanify wants me to stop talking about. You want me to stop talking about Gretzky's ass and GWG jeans? Are you serious?
Wow, that's a great ass.
That's a great ass in some great jeans. So I don't know. I don't know if you've ever been to have you been to the Ram? Like, have you been? I used to walk Moses, our dog, on that property all the time. It's a stunningly beautiful property.
And I know that granite, that material she's talking about.
That Manitoba stone.
And when she talks about coming off a lake bed, like it's earthy, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I also wanted to mention, like not get too into it, but the people who own this building right here probably had a chance to sell this. I mean, this is the prime. This is the primest land you have right now in the city.
To sell it.
If you look behind us right here, this window, literally, you look at this window. There's Rogers Place.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not going to speak for them, but he's. Whoever they are, we know them, we love them, are probably protecting something historic here as well, where they could probably make a ton of dough by turning it into condos
I think
or something.
When it was announced, when the new arena project was announced, there certainly would have been opportunities.
100%.
I'm privy to some information, but I don't think I'm privy to talk to it on Alberta's
But
most
how
downloaded
incredible
podcast,
is this building in the heart of the city, right across? Like, it's just, you walk by it, you look at it, and that's why when Vivian's speaking, I can tell what she's saying. Like, let's try and repurpose these things first and foremost.
Yeah.
Let's not just think dollar signs, more condos. We can put those anywhere, right?
Yeah. We talked to, I'm going to hard swerve out of this, by the way.
Go ahead.
It's what we do. We always love to follow up and integrate. When we ask for your opinions, we ask for your feedback. We want to make sure that makes the show. And we talked to Professor Tim Caulfield this week about basically vaccines, right? And vaccine hesitance, and this story that you've seen if you're paying attention to Alberta politics. Eric Bouchard, an MLA out of Calgary, who says that he wants to see the COVID vaccine out of Alberta. And there's been some obfuscation and there's kind of some smoke screening going on. And he's saying, well, he said this to a podcast, by the way, in an interview. And now he's saying, well, I was kind of like, I could have said it better and I didn't really exactly mean that. But he did say that his win would come when the shot, as he called it, when the shot is gone. That would be his win, obviously. He used the word obviously. So the health minister has gone on the record, and if you listen to our episode with Tim Caulfield, I encourage you to do so. The health minister has said, this was a couple days ago, no, there's no plans for that. There's no plan to defund the vaccine or get rid of or limit access to the vaccine in Alberta. But Tim tapped into something, and it seems like every time we talk to him, it lights a fire under folks. He's got more critics than maybe anybody else I know, which probably is due in part to his outspoken nature and to his, obviously desire to see people focusing on science when talking about the vaccine. I want to get to a couple of emails here from Gerald and from Touring Zebra. But before we do, here's a quick clip of Professor Timothy Caulfield on this show just a couple of days ago.
There is a vast body of evidence, international, independent researchers all over the world, a body of evidence that tells us these vaccines have saved millions of lives. In fact, a study came out very recently, just like days ago, talking about how it saved 1.6 million people in Europe alone over a pretty restricted period of time, just a couple of years. It reduces the incidence of heart attack and stroke, contrary to what you often hear. It improves pregnancy outcomes. It benefits kids with asthma. It reduces hospitalization for kids and the incidence of COVID for kids. It has saved the world economy billions and billions of dollars. There was even an interesting study that talked about how it helped, sort of economic activity because it allowed people to get to work. Very interesting study where they, looked at the mobility of individuals. It's just again and again and again, the data tells us that these vaccines were a massive scientific success.
So that was Professor Timothy Caulfield on this show. That was on the 13th of August. If you want to check out that episode, that was a Tuesday. And the response to Professor Caulfield on the team on the show rather, has been astounding, including emails to us. A lot of them pretty fiery. And I don't know if your DMs have been hit up like personally on Instagram or otherwise, but I've been hearing from a lot of folks that are essentially feeling like their concerns or their personal experience has been dismissed, has been ignored, is being mocked. And many of you, and I hope that you're hearing this, have spoken to us about a class action lawsuit. This is being spearheaded by Rath and Company. You've probably heard the name Eva Chipiuk. She's a lawyer, an Alberta-based lawyer. She's represented trucker convoy participants. She spoke and testified and participated in some fashion. I don't know all the details, but in those hearings, remember the hearing about the Emergencies Act, that inquiry, that public inquiry, and she's the one that's basically carrying this one forward, this COVID-19 vaccine class action lawsuit against the federal government and the Alberta government on behalf of those in Alberta who say they were harmed by the COVID-19 vaccines. And several of you have requested that we speak to Eva on the show. And my thought on this is, well, why wouldn't we? You and I had an interesting thought. We were kind of hashing this out. I hope you don't mind me dragging a private conversation into public here.
Uh-oh.
But when Tim's talking, and I have a ton of respect for what Tim does, and I believe Tim to be fact-focused, and I think that his research is well-respected. I know that some people say, well, he's like funded by this group or he's funded by that group, and that's something, and we've talked to Tim about that in past on the record. You can check out all of his interviews with us in our archives, and we've specifically talked about his funding. I don't get into it every single time we talk to him, but that's something that every researcher oftentimes has to speak to, right, is the source of their funding, who they're accountable to, who they're reporting to, that sort of a thing. But you and I were even talking about like we know people personally, and I'm not going to say people that have proof, although some people certainly do feel they do, but I know one person in particular, I'm not going to get too personal about the story, who lost a very close family member shortly after getting vaccinated, who passed away, a young person with no other medical history to explain it. And this family is adamant, like strongly believes, is convinced 100% that death was due to the vaccine. And so it's kind of interesting for me to hear, and I want people to know, and I'm speaking to the people that have emailed us. One guy in particular wrote me an email yesterday that just kind of stopped me in my tracks. It was really like aggressively written, but also I kind of understand why. Of course. Right? Because this guy is writing with a lot of conviction, and I find that when I'm reading something, because he's not screaming in my face, I can kind of like tone down the tone of the email just with my own calm breathing and actually sift through it and read his words. And this guy was like, it's like nobody is willing to hear us out. It's like we're second-class citizens. It's like nobody believes us. He's like, we're talking about people's lives moving forward here. And it resonates with me because I do think that, kind of, I don't know, I'm waxing here a little bit.
No.
But one of the things around COVID And one of the kind of like trends that developed during COVID, and one of the things I think we're trying to get away from now that we're essentially, for all intents and purposes, through the pandemic, is that everybody got divided into camps. There were like the idiots and the buffoons. You know, that was it. And it was like you planted your flag and you picked your camp, and everybody else was an idiot. And people, to a certain degree, to a great degree, I think a lot of people lost their empathy or set it aside, or just simply decided if you were with them, then you're no longer with me. And I don't ever want this show to be that. I don't ever want to be that personally. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, because we notice when we get like dozens and dozens and dozens of emails, when we get hundreds of comments, that's something that lands with us.
Of course.
And I wanted to touch on it.
You can't fault people for their perspective. When something difficult happens to someone you love, of course you're going to form an opinion of that. And I've never said on here that nobody has never died from a vaccine or had an adverse effect. The trials showed that there were adverse effects. We spoke yesterday about someone I know personally who had adverse effects for almost 2 years and is just getting over them. But when you weigh the lives saved against the adverse effects and lives lost due to vaccine, one greatly outweighs the other.
100%.
And that's the main point here. Would I run up and rub that in someone's face whose child or grandmother or spouse had died because of complications? No freaking way. And I do agree that Tim, he gets very emotional because you can tell he's a researcher. He tries to be unbiased, but he has his opinions too, right? So, but I like how you said that today, because we both know people who this has affected. And just because we come on here every day, you know, not touting the vaccine, but we're in favor of it. We both had it.
Yeah.
We see the studies. We know what the research says.
I had a friend call me yesterday on the phone, which is, by the way, it annoys me. It annoys me when people call. Text me, but he called me, and because I respect him, I answered it, and I'm hoping he hears this. And but he said to me, he said, like, you know where I stand on this. He said, but I want you to put it into words. He was all fired up. He had heard the podcast. He was all fired up, and he said, I want you to tell me, like, do you go to the wall for the vaccine? Do you back the vaccine 100%?
I don't.
And I was kind of like, well, here's my point. Like I said, my position on this is like, I got vaccinated, and I think everybody should get vaccinated. That's my position on it. I don't think that people should be like pinned down and the shot placed in them. I believe in choice in medical treatment, but there's also kind of consequences to it. Like I didn't feel, to be honest with you at the time, and I said it out loud at the time, this is nothing new. When you couldn't come into a restaurant or you couldn't go to a movie theater without showing your vaccine passport, that's fine. That's a choice you made.
Yeah.
You made the choice. You weren't going to get vaccinated for a period of time. You weren't going to be able to go where people that were vaccinated could. That's fine. So I support that type of a thing.
Employers should be allowed to say, don't get the rest of us sick.
Sure. Like,
right?
fair enough. Fair enough. And my position on this is that the vaccine saved many, many lives, like millions of lives. And so that's my position on it. But would I ever say that not a single person saw negative health impacts or consequences due to taking the vaccine?
It's impossible.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not, because we know for a fact that that's not true.
We're talking about 80% of the planet almost had this needle. Of course, there's going to be tons of people who experience things. There's no way you could give 80% of the planet a glass of milk. They're going to have adverse effects. Actually, probably most of them, because most of the planet's lactose intolerance. But I'm glad you got this out of the way on the show today, because I feel like people, like we're not out there knocking on doors saying everybody get 10 boosters. We're simply saying, here's what we're looking at the research, and it's all this way. It's all it all shows us the same thing.
And like, just to be real, and if someone, I'll talk about a hypothetical, but actually I won't talk about a hypothetical here. Like, check this out, rathandcompany.com. So this is the law firm that's initiating this class action. And they talk about Carrie Sakamoto, and I've not interviewed Ms. Sakamoto. I'm just reading from their website. That's the source, rathandcompany.com. A young mother from Lethbridge who sustained severe, permanent physical and emotional injuries and damages from the COVID vaccines, listed as a class representative for the proposed class action lawsuit. So let's just say you're this person, you're this young person, and you take the vaccine and you sustain severe, permanent physical injuries due to that vaccine. What type of a society are we if we're either going to say that didn't happen and you're wrong, or we're not going to help you out?
Of course.
You did what we asked you to do, and now we're not going to help you out. That to me seems to be problematic. So I think we need to ask these tough questions about ourselves.
100%.
That's the whole point of this show. Like, and I want people to know that the emails that you send us, we read them and they resonate with us.
We read them together. And
do.
the other side of this is, I'm not going to villainize scientists, researchers, nurses, health professionals who came up with a vaccine in a very short period of time that was very effective. And yes, there are some problems. We're not saying there isn't problems, and people shouldn't be compensated, and that people don't have feelings, and they can't be angry and upset.
Yeah.
But like, there's degrees to this. It's not one way or the other.
100%. So we'll continue our conversation on this. We want you to know that you are heard. Okay, that's the point of this, and your feedback means a lot to us. Touring Zebra wrote in to talk at ryanjespersen.com just like literally 5 minutes after we talked to Tim Caulfield. Says, I was listening to your discussion about the uptake of COVID vaccines in Alberta this year. What was it again, Johnny? It was like 19% or something like it's under 20%.
Yeah.
It's fewer than one people in
16
five
or 17
got their COVID shot in Alberta this year. Says the low numbers of people accessing vaccination this year seems to be being used as political justification for dismissing the validity and the efficacy of the vaccine. And I know what you're saying. Says as well as a validation of pseudoscience. Now, I don't know the reasons for individual people not getting vaccinated, but when I was at my doctor last week, says Touring Zebra, I inquired about when I could get the booster. And my doctor told me that other than seniors or medically vulnerable people, boosters are not permitted for anyone else. So that makes me wonder, is the government denying people the booster? Therefore creating an artificial lack of participation? Ryan says, maybe my doctor had the wrong information, but I think it's worth exploring. That's an interesting one. I'm proud to tell you, I've not told you this yet, John, but you and I made a commitment to each other. I'm seeing my doctor next week.
Ooh.
Yes, I'm seeing my doctor. And so Touring Zebra, I'm going to be taking your email in there, and I'm going to ask him about this, and that's something we're on, because I was trying to wrap my mind around that as well. Fewer than 1 in 5 people getting their vaccine this year, getting their COVID shot this year is somewhat, I guess, somewhat shocking on the surface, because it looks like, imagine during the pandemic, I'm comparing apples and oranges, but imagine if you heard that just 1 in 5 people were going to get the vaccine when it first came out, you would wonder what the hell was wrong with, you'd wonder what's gone wrong with society. Mm-hmm. But then I look around us, and there's nobody really talking about it. And maybe people just don't talk about it as much. Maybe there's fatigue around talking about it. I don't know.
I'd like to see more numbers, because what does that mean? Did these people also not get a flu shot? I'd like to see those numbers. Did they get a flu shot and they think, hey, COVID's kind of in the rear view, and I can just get my flu shot and I'll be okay now? Or are they like, I'm not getting any more needles, period, those 17%, which I doubt that is. But I would like to see just some more in-depth
100%.
What that means,
because the number on the surface is somewhat shocking, and then you also you look around in your own peer group. I guess I'm asking you to do the same with yours, or to think about when's the last time your friends talked about it. I don't know how many of my friends, and I guess I
don't bring it up.
People will probably criticize us. I'm not trying to do a disservice here. I'm not trying to convince you of anything with regards to your own health care. This show believes in science, but I will say, just talking to my friends, I don't see all of them dropping everything to make sure that they get the flu shot every single year. I'd be curious to see what uptake's like with that. There's people that I think have it wired into their brains that they get that flu shot every single time. Parents probably make decisions based on their kids.
Sure.
And, kids that are going to daycare, or kids that are going to elementary school where everyone's got the sniffles or whatever. Yeah. But the average adult, I'd be curious to know what uptake is on the flu shot.
Yeah, because I'll be honest, I haven't had a flu shot in years. Since I was in the last time I took it was when I was in school, because you're around tons of people all the time. But until the COVID vaccine, I can't remember the last time I had a flu shot.
You remember
when I think of flu shot, I think of the elderly or the really young, and
sure.
Or people in school, because you don't want to get a ton of people sick.
You know when I used to get mine? When you and I were both working for the Oilers, and they used to set up the flu shot pavilion.
Actually,
right on the concourse there. And so when everybody would
I did get one of those.
Everybody would get their beers. Now. Everybody would go pee.
Yes.
They'd go back to their seats. They'd drop the puck on the second period. The lineup would disappear, and I'd walk right up and get my flu shot.
So I did have a flu shot about 4 or 5 years ago.
We also talked about gray areas and doctors, and you can see the stories. You can Google it. Some of them more prominent than others, but there are doctors that have been sanctioned by their professional associations, by their colleges and governing bodies for comments that they've made about the vaccine, for comments that they've made about COVID. And we talked a little bit about gray areas and talked to Professor Caulfield about how he feels about professionals being sanctioned. And I invoked the example of Jordan Peterson and the Ontario College of Psychologists, or whatever it's called, essentially telling him probably like one of the most famous Canadians on planet Earth right now. Mm-hmm. It was just bonkers because 10 years ago, nobody knew who he was. 5 years ago. But like Dr. Jordan Peterson has a following in the millions, and everybody reads his books, and everybody's got an opinion on him. But the fact of the matter is, his professional association told him he had to take social media training or he'd be disbarred, or whatever they call it for psychologists. And he's obviously pushed back. For a guy like Jordan Peterson, that is gold. Like, he doesn't care about what that college is going to do with his professional certification.
He's already gone from that.
What
he's
do you think?
Millionaire. What does he care?
He doesn't care about that at
Give
all.
a shit about teaching anymore.
I don't speak for him. But I would imagine that for his bank account, being a martyr and being disbarred or whatever you call it is probably way better. It's way better than being able to see people at $120 an hour for the rest of your career, which is not what he wants to do, and it's not what he was doing anyway. And Caulfield essentially said the same thing, that like the heavy-handed approach of suspending designations or of taking someone's career away from them is what you're doing is a last resort because of some of the reasons that I just mentioned. And it prompted an email from Gerald, which I appreciated. He said, Jesper, when you're talking about this so-called gray area, professionals chiming in and sharing personal opinions and having consequences for that, Gerald says, pretty much every single medical professional on the planet has guidelines for speaking outside of their scope of practice. A podiatrist, it's a foot doctor, right? Podiatrist says a podiatrist can't say, as a podiatrist, I know that the vaccine is X, Y, or Z. They're not supposed to speak out on it at all, for or against. It's outside of their scope of practice. So if your scope doesn't involve vaccines or contagious disease or cancer treatments or whatever it is that you're asked about, you're supposed to defer to provincial health. And Jordan Peterson absolutely used his professional standing as a basis or platform to support his views. He says it taken outside of medicine. Like, an RCMP officer won't go on the record in an interview saying that they don't support speed limits or whatever. Enforcement is in their scope. He says, now I understand that it feeds into conspiracy oftentimes, but legitimately professional colleges have to reprimand. They have no choice. And he says, and finally, Jordan Peterson was also in hot water for making very flippant comments relating to the mental health of people, and the comments were made publicly. And that is certainly something that violated his own professional standards. That from Gerald. So that's a solid email and a solid take.
Great. We love
Appreciate it. Yeah. We want to thank those of you that do take the time to send us emails and let you know how much we appreciate it. Your perspective goes a long way in what we talk about on this show and who we book. You help inform our perspectives, and we're grateful for that. Whether you are the rock stars in our live chat on YouTube every morning, whether you're one of those that's downloading the podcast later or watching us on YouTube when your schedule permits. Want to let you know what's coming up on our next episode. This is going to be on the 16th of August, a Real Talk Roundtable. As we wrap, I'm super excited to let you know that we have confirmed 2, and we're working on a 3rd, photojournalists, storytellers that were lucky enough to experience the career highlight of covering the Olympic Games in Paris. We're going to hear their stories behind the scenes. We're going to see some of the images they captured. You're going to hear about stuff that you didn't hear about on the big broadcast. It's a show that you won't want to miss. We'll see you then. Thanks in advance.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.